with Bancyfelin fulling mill, there's nobody alive that ever saw the mill. There's no information about it, and basically the design's actually been based on census, people that were actually in the village. There's one or two old photographs from the turn of the century, which has actually given us an idea of how the building actually looked. Do you want to just tell me? So, Bancyfelin, it was a village in the 1700s, and there were 3 families that were actually producing cloth at the time. And originally, the fulling process actually involved threading in vats of fuller's earth and urine or soap wort. From there, they would actually take them to a handy to actually have them fulled. Please. So, as I say, there was no photographs, no drawings, no real information on the size of the mill. But Bruce has actually prepared a much fuller document about the mill and much more factual information about the people that worked there, which I didn't think was appropriate for what my contribution to the project. But his background is cartography. So basically, with the Ordnance Survey maps, we were able to actually determine sort of the size of what the building might have actually been like. And so alongside the fact there's photographs of properties in the village from round about the sort of the end of the 1800s. Can we have that somewhere? So, from the information we've got, single-storey mill, thatched roof, would have probably worked with hammers and an undershot water whip. The mill was actually built on the tail end of the corn mill, which I'll show you some drawings of later on. So there's no mill pond, so it was a matter of how could they have actually sort of fed the wheel. The stream obviously was constantly running, so to ensure that there was actually enough water for the wheel, I take it that they had actually built a weir, or a sluice, across the it's about 10 foot wide. So that way they can also, in low water, ensure there's enough water to actually turn the wheel. It's an undershot wheel. So can we go to the next one? That's a view from the far side of it. And I mean, the fulling process really was to actually sort of close the fibres. It's to sort of remove the grease and the impurities. So, no, go to the next one, please. So, basically, the wheel actually turned a set of cams, which would actually just lift and drop the mallets to actually beat the cloth. Each washing took about 2 hours, and treated 3 times. First time the trough contained urine, and that was normally collected by the cask from cottagers who received a penny a bucket. So that's where the sort of raw materials came from. Second was fuller's earth, and the third was just hot soapy water, and then copious quantities of fresh water to actually clean the cloth. Can you do the next one, please? There you can actually see the cloth being put into the trough. It was actually folded in, and it would stay there, as I say, for about 2 hours. Can you do the next one? So, as I say, the cloth was treated 3 times. That's the function of the hammers. So basically, as the water wheel's turning, turns the shaft with the cams, and that will actually lift a series of hammers. Can you go to the next one, please? That's the effect of the fulling on the cloth. So the first one is basically the raw fabric actually being put into it. Second one, after a short while of being fulled, will produce what the latest cloth. It was less durable but much softer, actually making it into clothes. And the third one, the menswear, that would be after like the full 2 hours of fulling. It's a very, very tough cloth. The fact that it's wool, if it absorbs moisture, he won't feel cold with it. It doesn't. So go to the next one, please. So after the fulling, it would actually be taken out onto frames. The frames are about 40 foot long, 3 foot high, and you know on the bottom there's a series of holes, so the bottom bar is actually adjustable to suit the different types of cloth. Can you go to the next one? So behind most of the fulling mills there have been a series of these frames that the fabric would actually be held on to make sure it stays square when it was actually drying. So can you do the next one? So basically that's the hooks that the fabric would actually be supported on. You see, really, really close, so to make sure that the fabric didn't shrink too much. So, can we go to the next one? So, as the demand for fabric increased, during the 1840s, many of the fulling mills actually became wool mills. So the next one, please. So this is really where we've got, or Bruce got the information from. He's actually done all the research. All I've done is the drawings based on his information. And the thing that we noticed between the early Ordnance Survey map and this one is the little red triangle. So something had actually happened where the water wheel had probably gone inside the building. So it would have actually been a much bigger wheel. Can you go to the next one, please? So that's my interpretation. So the first part really is the undershot wheel and the mallets. Adjacent to it is actually a new breastshot wheel. And bearing in mind we're sort of limited on the depth of water. No pond. It had to be a matter of actually closing the lid such that it flooded back. And that actually then provided the water to actually be diverted into the building and to actually strike the wheel midway as a breastshot wheel. So the hammers would have probably been upgraded, and this again they figure is about 1841. It's about that time that the recording of the mill was changed from a fulling mill to a wool factory. So it was probably then that, again, with things that happening overseas and the demand for Welsh wool increasing, that they upgraded the mills. So can we go to the next one, please? Next one. Oh, sorry, no, yeah. Sorry, you changed it. Right, that is how I perceived that the mill would have actually been laid out in the building. So now, because of that triangular piece, the outfall from the wheel, they've had to widen the culvert to actually accommodate that water. So if you look at the 3D at the bottom, normal flow would be sort of fairly low in the trench. It could be anyway, any depth. But to get it to the height that we need to go into the wheel, you can close the two sluices, open the small one, and eventually the leak will actually fill to the point where it will actually overflow. At that point, by opening that sluice, you can actually feed the water onto the wheel, and that's actually then driving a set of mallets, which I've assumed would be the same, basically, that we have that some faggots. So that's where we actually get the extra water from. So once the fulling is complete, they'll just open one or two of the sluices. That will just let the stream run back to its normal level. Can we go back, please? Once it was actually extended, that's probably how it had been done. And I'll try to look at the logistics of how they actually installed the new equipment. And the one thing they wouldn't do is actually just stop the process. You can imagine now this is like mid-1800s. So they wouldn't just remove the old water, remove the hammers, just a big hole for the breastshot wheel to go into. The two would have actually been done in hand. So possibly the first floor would have actually been constructed after the whole thing was working. So they could actually keep the two wheels actually running side by side. And then eventually the wooden wheel would actually come out and there'd be, can you go to the next one, please? So that's how I imagine that the wool factory, because what they've done now, they've actually installed a loom, and they've also installed the facility of producing thread. I've used the mule from Margaret Lloyd's mill, Brandrick. It's difficult to measure. It was difficult to sort of understand what they would have actually used. And the fact it's only a small mill, it may very well have actually been hand operated as Margaret's was, rather than actually being driven by shafting. Again, that's where the sluices would be operated from. There's a storage yard to the left-hand side, which is indicated on the Ordnance Survey maps. So I think the next one. That's St Fagans. So basically that type of mallet is what I've assumed would have actually been a better proposition as the mill was upgraded to actually install a wheel similar to that. And again, I think it's probably about the same time period that they would have actually moved away from the mallets and actually, now we're looking at cast iron. Right, that's the function of the mallets as they're actually going around. What I haven't shown, being a little bit lazy, that each time the mallet come down, it would actually turn the cloth. Each time. But it became a much more complicated drawing to actually turn the cloth every time the thing's moving up and down. So, but fine, can we, next one please. That's from Margaret's mill, from Bancyfelin, which I think would probably be typical for the size of loom that they would actually need to install. And oh, it's me, sorry. I thought something on the roof. Sorry about that. I said it, the others would be more interesting. Sorry. Nah, idiot. Right. Yeah, so that's basically a mill and a loom. So at that point, in 1860, that was really the boom years. And from the census, they did actually have 7 people working in the factory. That was in 1871. So, go to the next one, please. The final process wasn't actually carried out in Wales. For some reason, the Draper's Company in Shrewsbury really had a monopoly on dealing and processing the wool from Wales. So basically the cloth was actually, the final teasing and napping was actually carried out in England. Then they would actually package it up and actually distribute. So so a couple of notes here. So the shearing was carried out at Shrewsbury. The weavers for the now derogatory term Negro cloth served a market that underwent an astonishing expansion in the 18th century. So I mean, basically most of the wool that was actually being produced in Wales was actually going to the slaves. And it appears that they would receive 2 sets of clothes every year. By that time they'd actually turned into rags, but they'd actually export the rags back to Britain to actually make paper. So they really didn't waste very much material. Again, some figures. 4 yards per slave as an average for the 1700s. That suggests 388,000 yards of woolen fabric around about 1690. That was when it done. Vaulting to 7,736,000 yards by 1812. The industry continued on after that, but obviously American War of Independence, the American Civil War, that changed it. But apparently there was still a lot of plantations in Brazil and a lot of the other Caribbean countries. And that really was the increase in demand from the 1800s, 1840s up to the 1870s. But then round about the 1870s, a lot of industrialisation happened, a lot of modernisation to the machines, the a lot of it became more automated. So consequently, really, the Welsh hand loomers really couldn't compete. So although they actually employed 7 people in 1871, by 1900 the mill had gone. It had closed down and finished. Can you go to the next mill, please? So from, say, 1870, its peak time, 30 years later it had gone. But if you look at the bottom, with New Zealand, they were actually mechanising, and consequently the wool that they were actually supplying. Because Wales was still working with hand looms and hadn't modernised, and basically Australia, New Zealand, those areas, you can see just the number of people and the type of factory. And so consequently, basically the wool industry just faded away. Can you go to the next one? Oh, sorry, that's actually the drawing. That's the fulling mill at the back, and Bancyfelin corn miller and the store. The owners of the corn mill did actually own the fulling mill as well. Just a couple of drawings I put in that just sort of show you what they're like. There's one more there. And again, that's the corn mill, and that was actually covered in an article in Melling a couple of years back. Fulling mill in the back, and the tentering frames. And so that really actually, can you go to the next one now? This one, maybe it's something actually that Mel can actually incorporate with the map she's doing. I didn't know she was actually doing it. But that's the number of mills I've actually drawn. There's 43 mills there. If you're actually interested in looking at the mills 3D, if you go to the mill drawing site, that's there. So, do you want to go to the next one? So, that really brings me to the end of it. Hopefully it's not been too uninteresting compared with the others. But, sorry for actually doing that.